So our next presentation is an update on Riparian. Mark Anderson, Director of Planning for the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary. We've been talking about this for a long, long time. And contrary to what some people seem to think, this is not getting shoved down anybody's throat. That's the most recent wording that was sent to me. In fact, if we were going to do that, we would have put this into place 3 years ago and not asked anybody for any input. My feeling on Riparian, and the same with Mark and most people, is if the Lakeshore people buy into this, it works. If they don't buy into this, it probably doesn't work. So we're trying to find an even ground that everybody will buy into, and therefore try to keep all waterways as clean as we can. Mark, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks. So as Grace has mentioned, we've been working on this for a few years, and most of you have seen this presentation. I've done many of these presentations over the last few years. So I'm trying to focus this one out as an update. I won't go through the intimate details of what's being proposed. I've got a copy of the draft guidelines over on the table by the exit there, so anyone who would like to review those, they're available. And if you've got any questions, if you're looking at them over lunch and want to ask questions during the open discussion this afternoon, we can get into some of those details. But ultimately, I just wanted to give people a sense of where we stand with this current initiative, and also refresh people's memories in terms of why we're undertaking this initiative and what the rationale is for it. It basically stems from a vision that's articulated in the official community plan for Christina Lake, a plan that was undertaken over a 3-year period and involved a considerable amount of community input. And there's quite a bit of literature or language in the official community plan with respect to protection of water quality in lakeshore areas. So we've been engaged in a process over the last few years of developing a policy mechanism to help to protect riparian areas, the areas along the lakeshore, stream banks, and the river banks, in a more naturally vegetated state than may otherwise be the case if development was allowed to occur without any sort of guideline. So the policy mechanism we're using is a development permit area and development permit requirements that would be included within the official community plan, where we've already got the policy direction to do that. And the goals, as shown here, are to improve or enhance water quality, fish habitat, erosion protection, and the natural character of the lake, and the streams and the river around. Now, natural buffers have a number of benefits to the lake and the streams and the river. It filters nutrients, both from lawn fertilizers, septic systems, the phosphorus and nitrates that Mike had been speaking of earlier that emanate from residential and commercial buildings. It buffers chemicals from lawn fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides. Those get taken up before they reach the lake. And it buffers sediments that might come from road or driveway stormwater runoff. Similarly, they provide habitat and cover for the insects and small critters that fish survive on. It provides shade and temperature moderation for the fish. Provides habitat for small mammals and birds as well. And it provides some natural erosion protection. It helps to anchor the soils along the lake and the river. Also protects the shoreline from the wave energy that takes away those soils. So ultimately what we've been trying to do is work at a succession to a more natural landscape along the lakeshore and along the Kettle River and the streams that flow into the lake. Specifically, we're dealing in this process in the area above the natural boundary, just upland of the natural boundary, and looking at protecting that area in a more natural state as new developments occur. So I should reiterate that this process or this initiative would apply to new developments, both new building and additions to buildings. It wouldn't apply to existing development. So that's one of the triggers that we're limited by through the Local Government Act, is development permits can only be required at certain stages of development. And what we'd like to do is, as people are developing their buildings, make them more aware of the importance of protecting riparian habitat, so that they have a commitment as they're building their new buildings or adding on to buildings to protect that riparian habitat. And ultimately that would be a commitment through the development permitting process that the landowner would have and be responsible for maintaining. At the provincial and federal level, back in the early 90s, the province and federal government developed the land development guidelines for protection of aquatic habitat. This actually forms the basis for our policy. It had originally recommended as a 15-meter leaf strip between the natural boundary and development, and that's a naturally vegetated area. The province has taken it one step further in the development of the Fish Protection Act and the Riparian Areas Regulation, Fish Protection Act in 1997 and the Riparian Areas Regulation in 2004. This is the Riparian Areas Regulation is a much more sophisticated process, requires a science-based assessment on a case-by-case basis by a qualified environmental professional for all developments, and that includes new buildings, additions, vegetation removal, grading of soils within 30 meters of a lake, creek, stream, or water. So this is the provincial scale. I just want to let everyone know and remind everyone that we're not doing this in isolation at Christina Lake. This is something that's been initiated in many other parts of the province and other parts of the world. The Riparian Areas Regulation, which was actually imposed on local governments in certain parts of the province by the province, required them by a certain date to establish policy mechanisms to ensure that as development occurs, they would be required to have a report submitted to the local government by a qualified environmental professional. That report would be reviewed by the local government, passed on to the Ministry of Environment for review, and potentially to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans if a HAD was suspected, which would be a harmful alteration, destruction, or disturbance or destruction of habitat. It's a fairly rigorous process. Now, this is a process that's been applied fairly broadly throughout the province, but not to us. We're over here at Christina Lake. This regulation, when it was instituted in 2004, was applied to a number of regional districts, mainly the most developed regional districts in the Okanagan, the Lower Mainland, and southern Vancouver Island. So it goes up to Thompson-Nicola Regional District, which is Kamloops, and through the Okanagan, Columbia-Shuswap Regional District, and up the island. You'll notice that the north, from the Caribou Regional District north, doesn't have the Riparian Areas Regulation applying, nor do the three Kootenay Regional Districts to the east. There's been a response, though, in other regional districts to develop their own lakeshore guidelines in recognition that lake shores are important and the quality of water in the lakes are important. So in those areas where the Riparian Areas Regulation wasn't applied, those regional districts have adopted their own lakeshore guidelines. So Peace River Regional District in the far north, Regional District of Fraser-Fort George in the Prince George area, so central interior, and then south of that, Caribou Regional District has also developed a shoreland management policy. Similarly, East Kootenay Regional District has developed management guidelines for Windermere Lake. So as we move back actually through those slides, well, the Riparian Areas Regulation is applied to the more developed parts of the province. Other regional districts, Caribou Regional District, Fraser-Fort George Regional District, Peace River Regional District, and East Kootenay Regional District have adopted their own initiatives. We're looking at doing something similar. So I just wanted to let people know that this isn't something that's being done in isolation. As some people have had a concern that we are not required to do this, so why should we? This is really, as I said, a vision of the official community plan. The official community plan for Christina Lake represents the goals and objectives and policies of the community with respect to how it wants to see development occur at the lake. So there are a number of goals in the plan. protection of the lakeshore environment is balanced with residential and recreational needs. Natural environment and water quality are protected to the fullest extent. Environmental hazards are recognized and avoided wherever possible. In terms of objectives, to actively protect water quality, recognizing the importance of this resource for domestic water consumption, recreation, and aesthetic qualities. To minimize disturbances of the lakeshore wherever possible, and to promote protection of fish and wildlife habitat. So what we've done is we've developed a set of lakeshore development guidelines that would be specifically tailored to the Christina Lake circumstance. In Christina Lake, the vast majorities of properties around the lake are already developed. So we're dealing with redevelopment, additions to buildings, redevelopment of old cabins, not new subdivisions or new development as much as redevelopment of existing properties. The Regional District Zoning Bylaw, some of you may not be aware, already restricts the creation of any new lakeshore parcels on Christina Lake, so you can't subdivide new parcels. So we're dealing with the parcels that we have now. Many of the parcels at Christina Lake are very small and or are topographically constrained. As I mentioned, the land development guidelines have a 15-meter leaf strip suggestion or best management practice associated with them. There are several lots that we've got at Christina Lake that were developed mainly as waterfront recreation lots that are not much deeper than that already. So in order to accommodate a house or a cabin, a septic system, parking, it would be impossible to require a 15-meter buffer area. So what we've done is tailored it to that circumstance. And then finally, the changing market and demographic conditions are leading to larger homes designed for year-round use. And I think everyone's seeing that around the lake. So the approach that we've been proposing is to require development permit applications for new buildings and additions within 30 meters of the lake or stream including the Kettle River. For developments, that being a new construction or an addition that's outside of the buffer area, the defined buffer area, and I'll get to the designation of that in a moment, the property owner would simply be required to submit a landscape plan for that area that's in conformity with a riparian buffer guide that the regional district would develop. It would be basically a best management practices guide with some suggestions as to how to maintain a riparian buffer. The property owner, as a condition of that new construction, would be required to submit a landscape plan, and that would become part of the development permit. They'd be committed to maintaining that riparian area in that state. If the property owner was proposing new development within the riparian buffer, they would be required to submit a plan prepared by a qualified environmental professional, usually a biologist. The tailoring of this approach is based on the capacity of individual lots to accommodate a buffer of a certain width. So deeper lots can accommodate a deeper buffer. The maximum we would look at is a 15-meter buffer for the deeper lots. In this case, more than 40-meter deep lot would require a 15-meter buffer. For those shallower lots, historically developed lots, it may be down as far as 7.5 meters. And that's the basic approach we're using. There are some exemptions involved, and usually when I go through the presentation, I lay out all the exemptions and everything else. But I just wanted to run over the approach that we're using. The buffer, when I'm talking about 7.5 to 15-meter buffer, is once again just this area, the upland area from the natural boundary. So that's the approach we're using. Over the last few years, there have been several presentations like this. Up until this past summer, there's been a fairly good response to the proposals that we've put forward. We've since this summer, we've been hearing quite a bit of concern. The Waterfront Property Owners Society, and Bill's here today, he can speak to some of this, Bill Strukoff, has expressed some concerns about this new approach that we're taking to riparian area protection. And that Waterfront Property Owners Society is only developed in the last year. And since their inaugural meeting this summer, we've received quite a bit of input, and the Society has asked the Regional District to hold off on implementing anything until they've had an opportunity to think about this some more and provide more input. So at this point, we've been in a listening stage, I guess, since the summer. We've been receiving quite a bit of input from people. Ultimately, we'll be compiling all the letters that we've been receiving and taking those to the Advisory Planning Commission. The Advisory Planning Commission has really been the sounding board on this whole issue, and we'll be discussing that at that level. But at this point, we're really just waiting to hear more from the Waterfront Property Owners Society. As Grace mentioned earlier, it's really important that the waterfront property owners have an understanding of where we're going with this and ultimately have a buy-in to what is being developed in the future. So if we can amend what's being proposed to satisfy some of the concerns without throwing out the entire concept, that may be possible. Or there may be some other approaches that we can take that are maybe more favorable, depending on what waterfront property owners are expressing now. We expect more from them in the future. Bill has mentioned to me just previous to this session that the Property Owners Society will be looking at potentially putting a survey out to their membership to see what the feelings are on issues like this. So we anticipate more input, and over the course of the spring, I anticipate we will, as a community, start to look at those letters that we've been receiving from the Waterfront Property Owners Society membership and reviewing the development permit guidelines that we have drafted to date and looking to see how they might be adjusted to address some of those concerns that we're hearing from lakeshore property owners. Hey, Grace, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, no, I think what we'll do is this will be part of the open forum conversation after lunch. So having this information now, I think, is really, really good, Mark. So maybe we can listen to the next one, which is the Eurasian milfoil presentation, and then it'll give you some food for thought while you're having your lunch. And after that, it'll be an open forum. And Mark, I'm sure there'll be lots more questions on where we're going with that, or where we're not going with that. And I would also add to that Brenda has a lot of information over here also on riparian and living by water. And what you're going to see probably me doing around this coming down the road is presenting people who have already either left their shoreline or have done some riparian work voluntarily to their shoreline, and I'm going to be featuring those in the local newspaper and giving those people kudos to trying to keep the lake as clean as we can. So, Mark? Okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.